Hello, gentle souls, and welcome to the Thriving HSP place to be. A little tacky? Okay, we're moving on. So I didn't want to make another YouTube video until I felt like my spark was back. Well, I waited and waited, and eventually I just decided that maybe it's best to fake it until I make it. So I'm back and I'm sparkly! Do you believe it yet? Alright, let's get down to business. Let's discuss what it's like when your high sensitivity trait takes over your life. So I've been vlogging about high sensitivity for like over a year now, and at some point I realized that it was kind of getting too much in the foreground of my life. It started to play a much bigger role than I wanted it to. At first, when you're discovering how your HSP trait plays a role in almost every facet of your life, it's like a huge paradigm shift. Suddenly your whole childhood makes more sense. Like why you always felt so different, why you never fit in, or why you always only had one single best friend at a time. I talk more about these revelations in one of my earlier videos, Daily Life for the HSP, so feel free to check that out. I'll leave a link in the description for you. But once you've settled into your new life with these new revelations about what makes you tick, what then? Since I started making videos about high sensitivity, I've gone from not talking about it to broadcasting it to the entire world overnight. And I've become more verbal about it in my personal life as well. Suddenly, my HSP trait was in the foreground of everything. Many friends, colleagues, and strangers alike have approached me exclaiming that they too think they might be highly sensitive. And I also spent a lot more time reading about the sensory processing sensitivity trait in order to be able to make more coherent videos. So I was deeply immersed in the sea of high sensitivity. I did it again, didn't I? I'm sorry, I promised you no more tacky. Moving on. But it was constantly on my mind. As the people closest to me started to understand me better by learning about my trait, they started treating me with more consideration. And I'm extremely grateful that I'm surrounded by such patient and considerate people. And I think that's why it's good to raise awareness about high sensitivity. But on the other hand, I don't want people to walk on eggshells around me either. There's a difference between people being considerate and people going out of their way to accommodate you. I don't want it to be the kind of thing that I use as an excuse for every situation. You know, like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that because I'm an HSP. You can get so lost in the highly sensitive person aspect that you lose track of the fact that you're also just a human being. And that's why I never liked labels. You become boxed up into this one specific thing, and that's just very limiting. It creates self-limiting beliefs and also changes the way that people treat you. Like, for example, if you get the label of the shy person, then at a certain point people stop expecting you to be outgoing. And then you're never challenged to step out of your comfort zone and grow from that experience. So you just kind of get stuck in that little box. And we're all guilty of it. We lay expectations like that on people all the time because our brains are wired for classification. It's just our brain's way of trying to be more efficient with its energy reserves. So, I mean, we can't really blame it. But it's not the most mindful way to go through life, and it makes us miss what's right in front of us sometimes. This kind of labeling can even go a step further, because at some point you'll notice that sometimes people start making decisions for you. Has anyone ever told you something like, I didn't ask you to that party because I figured it was gonna be a large crowd, it was gonna be too loud, and I didn't think you'd enjoy it? I mean, you lose a little bit of agency of your life if you're not careful. So I started to dial it back a bit. So now I'm a bit more reserved about bringing up the subject of high sensitivity. And when I'm voicing my limitations, I'll phrase it differently. So I might say something like, I'm very tired because I've had a very stimulating day, rather than phrasing it like, I'm an HSP and I've reached my high sensitivity limit for the day, period. Because when you say it in the labeling way, you place yourself in that categorical box with the label, warning, highly sensitive. So what can we do when we feel like people from the bottom of their hearts want to make sure that we're comfortable, but we feel like they're overstepping? If I notice that someone is constantly trying to accommodate me, I might just indicate to them that they needn't worry about me and that I will be sure to let them know if I am truly uncomfortable and I wish to be accommodated. That way they're not constantly trying to figure out if they need to make adjustments for me, and they can just trust that I will bring it up if I truly am extremely uncomfortable about something. That way they don't have to keep asking if I'm all right, and I've taken a little bit of agency back. I mean, you might say it sounds lovely that someone is trying to constantly adjust the environment to your specific needs, but personally I feel a little bit selfish when someone constantly goes too much out of their way to please me. And while my reserves are much less than the non-HSP, I also want to accommodate other parties with their needs. I feel like it should be more of a give and take. But there's a fine line between a healthy dose of kindness and making me feel like royalty because I can't handle as much. But hey, maybe that's a natural part of the process. In order to restore balance, we often go from one extreme to the next. And then we finally settle in the middle somewhere. So you gotta figure out where that middle lies for you. Furthermore, I also fear that if the world is constantly accommodating my needs, that I will become too comfortable. As in, the less that I am exposed to discomfort, the less stressors I will be able to handle. I think it's good to be exposed to some discomfort from time to time. It keeps our baseline tolerance up, and it also keeps our brain agile. The problem is when we are exposed to too much discomfort. Then our system gets an overload and it just shuts down. That's when we feel so overwhelmed that we become less present and less productive. When this happens to me, it's like I just suddenly fade off into the background and I'm just not present anymore. It's as if suddenly my mind walked out of the room. See ya! I'll feel so fatigued that I can't access the brilliant, witty information that is stored in this cranium. Yeah, I mean, I never claimed to be the smartest person in the room, but to be the zombiest person in the room, no fun. Some of the triggers for me, like situations that lead me to that state of mind of depletion, are situations like being in large crowds for too long, or having very strong wind blow on my face for a period of time. Trying to listen to a conversation with a friend while there's radio or TV blasting in the background. Being blinded by bright lights in the background while you're trying to make eye contact with someone. Or having conversations in a car while you're the one driving and people are talking to you, but you're trying to focus on driving. Exhausting. Or sitting right underneath the stream of an air conditioning. Or being confined to a small room where one person decided that the whole world needs to find out what cologne they're wearing. I could go on, but I think you get the idea, and I'm sure that you can relate to some of these. The world can be such an exhausting place for the HSP. But what I've learned is that when I focus too much on the things in my surrounding that affect me negatively, they start to weigh on me even more. It's almost like you're mentally zooming in on the problem and thereby enhancing it. So before changing or walking away from these types of draining or stressful situations, I'll actually often try to meditate my way through it first. I start to focus on my breath, which I often notice I've actually been holding in at that point. I'll do a couple of deep breaths in and out. And basically, I'm just zoning out of the situation for a moment by meditating and focusing on my breathing. And then once I become present of my surroundings again, I'll try to focus on anything other than the thing that had been bothering me. So if it's an AC stream that's blasting on my face, then I'll try to look at the beautiful tree outside the window and give that my focus for a moment instead. Sometimes that actually works because then your mind starts focusing on something else, and then after that tree, I focus on yet another thing, and before I know it, I'm so unfocused on that AC on my face that minutes or maybe even an hour has gone by and I survived the situation. Albeit with a little bit of frostbite on the tip of my nose at that point, but hey, at least I didn't have to go home. And if you're not big into meditation, just keep in mind that it's like a muscle that you need to train. I've noticed over the years that I've gotten better at it, and there was a time where I really wasn't sure if it would ever give me any benefits because it was just too slow of a process. But I kept reading about the powers of meditation, and so I kept trying it, and years later, it is one of the best tools that I find to deal with situations that feel too overstimulating. But sometimes I'm too depleted to even try. And then the only solution for me is to just excuse myself from the situation and go isolate somewhere. And people might find it rude that I just head home in the middle of a gathering, but I know that if I don't, then I'll have a massive headache the rest of the day, probably even the next day, and I won't be good company anyway if I stay. And maybe this is a tool that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me. I have to choose my sanity before all else. Because if I'm not doing too well, then I put myself at a risk of picking up a drink, which for an alcoholic like me is literally like putting my life on the line. And it's the same with my high sensitivity. If I don't take care of my well-being, then my body, mind, soul, spirit, I just completely fall apart. But that choice should be mine to make. I want to have that agency in my life. Just to bring it back to the point of today's video. It's a good thing to stand up for your particular needs, but just be careful not to let your high sensitivity take away your agency. And that's all I wanted to say for today, so I'll leave you on that note. But before I go, I am thrilled to announce that my Thriving HSP e-course is now live. So if you're still enjoying the exploring of your sensitivity trait, and you want to discover some helpful tools in dealing with overwhelm and stress as an HSP, as well as gain more peace, and discover some tools to help you thrive as a highly sensitive soul, then I urge you to check out the link to my e-course in the description. I wanted to create an accessible course that anyone could do without feeling like the commitment was too demanding, while still offering ample benefit and depth. The course will provide you with several journaling prompts and exercises to encourage you to step out of your comfort zone, all while discovering your inner balance and managing your energy reserves. I really hope you guys will find it helpful. And some other things to look out for on the horizon are some upcoming interviews and podcasts with fellow HSPs right here on this channel. Until the next one, arrivederci, nostra topa. It really is like a muscle that you need to flex. I also fear that if the world is constantly conforming to my needs, that I will